Lord Andrew Adonis joins us now. Good morning to you.
Good morning, Julia.
Good morning. What do you think is going to happen this week?
Well, the one constant, which you and I have discussed over the months, Julia, is that Theresa May is absolutely useless.
I think can we have a vote? Yeah, we've all agreed on that one. Yeah,
she's incapable of finding a way forward that unites her own party, let alone Parliament, and she's about to do the same again. Remember, she said after she lost her first vote in Parliament on her deal by the unprecedented majority of 230, she said that the way through was to renegotiate the Irish backstop. Well, actually, that was always a mistake because her deal was rejected in its entirety, not just because of the provisions relating to Ireland, but in any case, she'd agreed the provisions relating to Ireland. She said that they were essential and they couldn't be improved. And sure enough, what did the EU say to her? That they were essential and they couldn't be improved. And so when Geoffrey Cox, who most of us hadn't even heard of a month ago, but who turned up in Brussels with his great baritone voice, doing a kind of Gilbert and Sullivan act and saying that actually what Theresa May had said a month before was no longer operable and he wanted to rip up the backstop. Of course, that got a raspberry. And so what she's going to be faced with in Parliament tomorrow is a situation very similar to when her deal was last rejected 2 months ago. And there are then only two ways forward. One is no deal, which virtually no one wants. Even radical Brexiteers know that we don't want to leave the country with 6 weeks in medical supplies, planes not flying and all that. Or we have to have an extension of the negotiating period so we don't crash out at the end of the month. And then, as I've been saying to you for months and months now, Julia, I think there is only one way of resolving this, which is to put it back to the people, give them the deal, which of course we didn't have 2 years ago.
There's no point. Hold on a minute. There's no point giving the British people the deal if it hasn't got the support of MPs in the House of Commons.
Well, it's the people who then decide. It doesn't matter what MPs have decided at that point.
Well, hold on a minute. Andrew, this is throwing me completely. It doesn't matter what MPs think. We're constantly being told that Parliament has to have its say and has to give the okay to all of this. The British people were offered the decision and a manifesto commitment at two general elections that do you want to have a say on Brexit? Vote for the Tory party because then you'll get a say. We voted to have a say. We got given a vote by MPs voted to have that referendum and go through. They then voted to trigger Article 50. MPs have had enough of a say. We know that, but the British people have already had their say. Nothing has changed since 2016.
Well, everything has changed in 2016. Actually, that's the whole point. We've got a deal now. We can see the catastrophe of Theresa May's negotiations. We can see it's going to make the country a lot worse off. Whereas, remember, 3 years ago we had this bus telling us we'd all get 350 million more a week for the NHS. But crucially, Parliament hasn't been able to make a decision either. When I said that what Parliament decides doesn't matter, I meant in the event of there being a referendum, because then the people will decide.
But we were we were all told that in 2016. Why should we believe you this time when you lied to us last time?
Well, there wasn't a deal last time. We voted last time on 4 words. Leave the European Union.
And yes, exactly. It didn't mention a deal. I didn't vote to leave the European Union, but only if we can get the exact perfect terms from the European Union. I voted to leave the European Union. Full stop.
Yeah, but the truth is, because there was no deal, people voted a whole range of different things. Some people voted...
So, as they did for Remain.
Some people voted...
Some people, I know people who have been lifelong Eurosceptics who loathe the European Union but were worried about the Project Fear warnings and they voted Remain. People voted for very many different reasons, as they do in every election, whether it's a local election on the bins or whether it's a European election on immigration or whatever it is. People vote for very many different reasons, but that doesn't mean the vote was invalid.
No, but Julia, the point we're in now is a great crisis. Parliament's
and who created that?
Well, it doesn't matter whose fault it is. I mean, it's predominantly Theresa May's fault, but we are where we are. In life, you always have to move on from where you are. There is no chance of her deal going through. It won't go through because it's a very bad deal, 39 billion for a load of junk in terms of, what much worse trade and economic relations with Europe than we've got now, even though the money that was supposed to go to the NHS instead would go to Brussels. So given that we are where we are, the only way I can see that now gets us through this is to put this actual deal to the people, because it wasn't there 3 years ago, and say, look, do you want this, or would you actually prefer on mature reflection to stay in the EU? And my advice is very straightforward. We're much, much better off now staying in and putting this...
that's been your advice all the way along. If there was a single person involved in the campaign for a second referendum who actually had been on the winning side in the first referendum, then maybe the 17.4 million Leave voters would take it more seriously.
But Julia, actually, underlying this argument between us is a large measure of agreement. Theresa May cannot get anything through Parliament. She can't because she's been unable to negotiate a deal which either satisfies you or me. And we are
no, Andrew, we don't have to satisfy you. Well, that's why we had a referendum. The whole point of the referendum was this was a binary decision. There wasn't a compromise option between leave or remain. And therefore, we had a binary decision. We were told the government would implement that decision. And then, therefore, it needs to please leave voters, not remain voters. I'm ever so sorry, but that's like saying, you could elect a Corbynista government. If Jeremy Corbyn gets elected at the next general election, I wouldn't vote for him. I think people would be crazy to vote for him. I think he'd be a terrible Prime Minister. I wouldn't try and stop him moving into number 10 and doing his job. And I wouldn't expect him to govern with policies that I supported or required him to do so, because I would have lost the election.
But Julia, you voted Leave. You're one of the most powerful Leave champions in the country.
Oh, I love that.
You don't like.
Still got one vote.
And indeed, you've told me in the past that you think it would be better to stay in the European Union.
No, I haven't. No, I've said that the Prime Minister's Withdrawal Agreement is so bad it's worse than Remain.
Well, that is the same thing.
Let's be clear. Yes, but that's the whole point. No. But if there was a delay, let's say there was a delay, the whole point of the delay would be to have some sort of final decision. Now, you and I both know the EU are not going to come up with some great new offer for us. This Prime Minister is totally incapable of getting a good deal for us. So the only other options there are either a general election. Well, Turkeys don't vote for Christmas. None of these Tory MPs are going to vote for there to be a general election. Indeed, many Labour MPs are desperate to stop Jeremy Corbyn becoming leader. They're not going to vote for general election. So the only other option is a second referendum. If there were a second referendum, and I still think that would be a terrible, terrible decision for our democracy. If there were, the only two options that should be on the table would be withdrawal agreement the Prime Minister has negotiated and no deal, because those are the only two things that are actually viable at the current time. Remain has already lost. Why on earth would Remain still be on the ballot paper?
Remain's absolutely viable. It's what is the state that we're in at the moment, and it works perfectly well. And the polls,
it works perfectly well.
The great majority of people want to remain. So obviously,
no,
Remain.
They don't.
It will be fun.
No, Andrew, we've talked about this before. You don't. I know if you get away with these things on the BBC, but you don't get to come on my show and just make announcements and tell untruths like the vast majority of people want to remain. No, they don't.
They do.
No,
polls show well over 50%.
Well over 50%. What counts as well over these days? 52? I don't know. Is that well over?
Yes, but the point about it, Julia, is you cannot then not have Remain on the ballot. You can't have the most popular option by far.
Asked and answered.
Country favours.
Asked and answered.
Not put it on the ballot, because that would be profoundly undemocratic. That's why the whole purpose of having a referendum is an exercise in democracy. And if you actually refuse to grant the people the option they most want, then this would be entirely invalid.
Andrew, well, A, it's not what they most want, and B, if you could just imagine the huge amount of laughter we've just had in the studio at the idea that this would be an affront to democracy. Do you not worry? Now, whether or not you think staying in the EU is a good thing or not, obviously you think it's a good thing. I mean, you've written I would say, hilarious article this morning. You've actually, not this morning, you've quoted another article you talk about the European Union is the greatest international venture for peace, prosperity and freedom in the history of civilization. It's one of your pinned tweets. But look, we're going to differ on these things. But whether or not you want to stay in the EU or not, whether or not you think there will be an economic cost to leaving the EU, short term, medium term or long term, leaving that aside, do you not worry about the cost to our democracy of trust in our society, trust in our politicians, of good faith and of, well, frankly, law and order on the streets, if we did actually see the Brexit referendum result overturned? Do you not fear that?
I trust the British people. If the British people vote to stay in the European Union in a second referendum, that is the completion of democracy. It's not an affront to democracy. And you and I have been agreeing, actually, because despite the noise, there's actually a large measure of agreement in this conversation. We've agreed that Theresa May's deal is terrible, that it's actually worse than staying in the EU, even if you're a leaver, that the only way we're going to be able to resolve this, because Parliament is gridlocked, is by a referendum. We're differing on precisely what the issues are that should be put in the referendum, but the case I make, which I think all reasonable people would agree, is you couldn't hold a referendum and not give people the option to remain. If that referendum takes place and people vote to remain, that will be the expression of the British democracy.
But why don't we then do best of five?
It's a perfectly reasonable way of proceeding.
Okay, here's the thing. Let's just say there was a second referendum. Let's just say there was a narrow vote for Remain. And you, of course, and all the Remainers and the establishment would all go, well, job done, move on. What if then, a couple of months later, the EU start perhaps more moves towards integration, perhaps a requirement, and there's been some talk of this, it's not actually official policy, but that perhaps actually we do need to join the Eurozone. Perhaps, we definitely need to have the EU army. We start losing more of our qualified majority voting, and therefore we lose our veto on various things. What if the EU then changed? Would you be happy to have another referendum on the basis that, well, when the situation and the information changes, we need to have another referendum?
I'm a practical guy, and all of the three things that you've just said won't happen. Okay. We're not going to join the euro, we're not going to have a European army, and we're not going to slash our rights of voting inside the European Union. So whilst I don't rule out...
We've already slashed our rights of voting in the European Union.
But the things you were saying which might lead to another referendum...
They're forming an EU army.
I cannot conceive of a British government that's going to take Britain into a European army or join the euro in the foreseeable future. So given that that's the case, I think a referendum now that we've concluding this gruesome 4-year process of Brexit, I think that will put the issue to bed for a good period of time, which is what the British people want, because where we started this conversation actually was you talking about knife crime. I could talk about education, about the health service, about homelessness. These are huge issues, all of which have been put on hold because the whole of the political establishment is obsessed by Brexit at the moment.
Well, but hold on a minute. They're only on hold because the people like you, Tony Blair, Nick Blair, all of the others who have all been fighting against the outcome of a democratic vote. We could have probably had, we realistically, without having sort of effectively parallel negotiations going on from the likes of the Ramonas in Brussels, we could probably have had this done and dusted by now.
Well, that of course is complete rubbish. The reason we're in this position has nothing whatsoever to do with me or the Labour Party. It's all to do with Theresa May being unable to find a way forward.
She takes a vast majority of the blame, no doubt.
Cameron's foolish referendum. So the two people to blame, if we're in the blame game, are David Cameron for calling this referendum and Theresa May for being unable to find a way forward. What those of us in Parliament, have been doing is trying to make the best of it on behalf of the British people. And I believe the best way forward now in this gridlock situation that we're in is to hold a referendum, to give people the option to stay in the European Union and to put this nightmare behind us.
And of course, to give people the option of no deal.
Well, if that is what Parliament wants to do...
Oh, if that's what Parliament... Isn't it funny how the people should have the final say, but only after Parliament get to decide what it is the people are allowed to have a say on?
Well, we're a parliamentary democracy, so if there's a referendum, it will be called by Parliament, and Parliament will set the question.
Yes.
So I can't say what leave option they would put in, but the fact that you're saying that there should be a no-deal option is very revealing, because so little confidence do you have in Theresa May and her own Brexit deal, which was to take us out of the EU, that you think we should have a different option. So basically, the people who want to leave need to get together. I suggest we put you together with Theresa May, with
Theresa May doesn't want to leave the European Union.
Well, she does. It's what she says she wants to do.
She says a lot of things.
Possible. So, but I think between you should agree what you think is the leave option, because I'm very clear what the other option should be, as are almost everybody else in Parliament, which is that we should have the option to stay in the EU and
again, and that's the problem. You just nailed it with that phrase. Almost everyone else in Parliament, Lords and MPs. Again, it's totally unrepresentative of the British people.